Hello, viewers! Today we're going to talk about an incident that completely blew the lid off the American healthcare system. In the early morning hours of December 4th, 2024, a shooting took place in Midtown Manhattan, New York that shocked the nation. Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealth Group, was tragically killed in the incident. As the man at the helm of a giant corporation in the healthcare field, his passing should have sparked public condemnation of the violence and mourning for the deceased. However, the actual direction of public opinion was completely beyond anyone's expectations. There was little sympathy from the American public for the victim, no mass mourning, and no strong condemnation of the killer. Instead, there was a heated debate that swept across the country, all centered on America's long-standing healthcare situation. This contrast in public opinion is no accident. It is the culmination of a long history of dissatisfaction with the healthcare system in the United States. UnitedHealth Group, as a leading company in the U.S. health insurance industry, reflects the many problems of the U.S. healthcare system in its business strategy and mode of operation. The public's dissatisfaction with the healthcare system is naturally projected onto the CEO of this company. For a long time, the U.S. public has been trapped in the expensive, difficult, and uneven distribution of healthcare resources predicament. These shortcomings have long been infiltrated into all aspects of people's daily lives. From health insurance benefits application is rejected to sky-high medical fees pressure. From drug prices to the quality of medical services vary. From high drug prices to uneven quality of medical services, these problems are eroding the quality of life of the public and making it difficult for the public to feel good about healthcare giants and their executives. The shooting incident was like a fuse that completely ignited the people's emotions that had been pent up for years. And the contradictions in the healthcare system that had been hidden under the surface were instantly exposed to the public. The focus of media coverage quickly shifted from the shooting itself to an in-depth analysis and reflection on the U.S. healthcare system. Calls for healthcare reform also rose. When it comes to the U.S. healthcare system, the most outrageous thing is its high cost. Low efficiency deformed state, input and output are completely disproportionate. First, look at the scale of expenditure. The United States in the healthcare investment ranked first in the world. Compared with other countries, the gap is shocking. 2023, the total GDP of the United States reached $27.72 trillion US, projecting healthcare spending as a share of GDP in recent years. The US will spend about $4.99 trillion on healthcare in 2024, accounting for about 18% of GDP. This figure far exceeds that of any other country and amounts to a significant amount of societal wealth being invested in healthcare. However, it is disappointing that such a huge investment does not bring the corresponding medical effect, but rather fell into the more money, the worse the effect of the strange circle. Compared with other rich countries, Americans visit their doctors 50% less often, which means that the frequency of basic medical services enjoyed by the American people is much lower than that of similar countries. But the medical costs they bear are much higher. Even more ironic is the fact that, despite increasing healthcare investment, life expectancy in the US is still lower than in other developed countries. According to the latest World Bank data, life expectancy in the US in 2023 will be 78.39 years, while the average life expectancy in high-income countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, is generally over 81 years, a difference of about 2.6 years, which is similar to the often heard of 3-year gap. In the healthcare system ratings of 10 high-income countries, the US ranks directly last in the two core indicators of healthcare outcomes and accessibility, which means that the US population not only has to bear higher healthcare costs, but also finds it difficult to enjoy high-quality, convenient healthcare services. From a purely financial perspective, the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association's 2025 update shows that by optimizing healthcare policy, for example, unifying payment standards, strengthening antitrust regulation, and facilitating the flow of name-brand drugs, the U.S. is expected to save nearly $1 trillion in cumulative healthcare costs over the next decade. This figure is not the $25 trillion in annual savings that has been circulating on the internet. which far exceeds the total annual GDP of the United States and is clearly inaccurate. Even if it is only $1 trillion, it still reflects the serious waste of resources and inefficiencies in the U.S. healthcare system. A large amount of money is not spent on core healthcare aspects such as diagnosis and care, but is consumed in various redundant processes. This not only increases the healthcare burden on individuals and families, but also creates a significant drag on U.S. economic growth. The many shortcomings of the healthcare system are definitely one of the core reasons why the U.S. healthcare system is in such a predicament. First, let's look at the market pattern. The U.S. healthcare market is highly concentrated and monopolized. 73% of the commercial healthcare market, 71% of the Medicare Advantage market, and 90% of the Affordable Care Act market are controlled by a few giant companies. This monopolistic pattern gives health insurance companies a strong market voice and provides room for their irrational operations. Unlike most developed countries, 92% of the U.S. population has some form of health insurance and can choose from a variety of health insurance companies. But this so-called right to choose makes the healthcare system more complex. Each insurance company has its own separate billing codes, payment processes, prior authorization agreements, and different levels of service, physician networks, and drug lists. In addition, there are multiple components such as drug benefit management companies involved, causing healthcare to increasingly stray from its essence of treating the sick and saving lives of others. And instead of being spent on diagnosis, treatment, care, or surgery, the money is wasted on trivialities such as filling out forms, reviewing processes, and repeatedly communicating and coordinating. One of the reasons that healthcare costs in the US are 30% higher than in other developed countries is because of high administrative overhead. This unnecessary internal friction results in a huge waste of money. To add to the public's headache, health insurance companies generally follow the strategy of deny, prove, defend, and try every possible means to deny claims. The average denial rate for U.S. insurers is 16%, with large insurers such as UnitedHealth and Medicare having denial rates as high as 32% and 27%. However, this data is based on statistics through 2023. In 2024, the rise in denial rates for Medicare Advantage plans narrowed to 18%, while denial rates for commercial insurance remained above 20%. This means that for every 5 patients a physician sees, nearly 1 patient's claim is denied by their insurance company. This high rejection rate directly transfers the pressure to patients, putting them in a dilemma: either pay for the high cost of treatment out of their own pockets, or they have to forego the necessary treatment. Patients who choose to pay out of pocket can easily go into significant debt. According to the most recent data from the U.S. Bankruptcy Institute 2024, approximately 64% of all bankruptcies across the U.S. are related to medical expenses. Additionally, nearly 40% of Americans delay treatment because they are unable to pay their medical bills. These delays often lead to worsening conditions and even endanger the patient's life. Health insurance companies argue that payment denials are an attempt to control costs and prevent hospitals from overtreating. While there is some truth in this, in reality, the underlying reason for their persistently high refusal rate is the pursuit of higher profits. The core reason why health insurance companies dare to be so brazen is that the appeal rate of patients is too low, at less than 1%. This is not because patients don't think they need treatment, but because the appeals process is both time-consuming and labor-intensive, and the process is so complicated that it is unaffordable for the general public. According to statistics released by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in January 2026, the percentage of Medicare Advantage plan denials in 2024 that were ultimately overturned was 27.5%. This suggests that many denials are actually deliberate attempts by health insurance companies to make things difficult for patients, with the goal of reducing expenses and increasing profits. In addition to denials, the prior authorization system of health insurance companies is even more bloodless. Doctors must first apply for permission from the health insurance company after formulating a specific treatment plan for a patient and can only implement the treatment after obtaining approval. The health insurance companies claim that this is necessary to ensure that the treatment is necessary. But in reality, it has many serious consequences. 30% of radiation oncologists said that they have had patients sent to the emergency room due to the cumbersome process of prior authorization and delays in approving the treatment, and even resulted in permanent disability. These patients were. What's even more outrageous is that 35% of the peer physicians responsible for reviewing these treatment plans are not oncologists, a problem that is prevalent in all specialties. Doctors report that in only 15% of the cases of peer review do the reviewers have the appropriate professional qualifications. Allowing non-specialists to review specialized treatment plans not only fails to ensure that the plans are reasonable, but also delays treatment, adding to the already chaotic healthcare system. One of the major reasons why health insurance companies can do whatever they want is that the market is too monopolized. Newcomers to health insurance companies face an extremely high bar, not only to meet strict regulatory requirements, but also to deal with anti-competitive behavior of the existing giants. In 2010, the US passed the Affordable Care Act, which requires insurers to spend 80 to 85% of premiums on healthcare services to limit their profit margins and protect consumer rights. In 2010, the US passed the Affordable Care Act, which requires insurance companies to spend 80% to 85% of premium revenue on healthcare services to limit their profit margins and protect consumers. In practice, however, health insurance companies have begun to find other ways to pursue profits. For example, UnitedHealth Group directly employs 10,000 physicians and has business partnerships with another 80,000 physicians, which together account for 10% of the total number of physicians. In the United States, on the surface, this seems to make healthcare more centralized and efficient. In reality, however, as power is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a small number of health insurance companies, their ability to increase prices and profit margins expands, which is contrary to the goal of improving healthcare outcomes and lowering costs. However, health insurance companies are definitely not the only culprits. Healthcare providers are also to blame. The collapse of the healthcare system has been further exacerbated by a variety of profit-seeking behaviors. Let's start with the physician community. Many people may not believe it, but US physicians are indeed a major driver of high healthcare costs. The core reason for this is the insufficient supply of physicians, which creates scarcity. According to the most recent ACD data released in 2025 and the PMC study, the US has only 2.6 practicing physicians per 1,000 people, compared to the OECD average of 3.5 per 1,000 in high-income countries. This supply gap directly pushes up the salaries of US physicians, resulting in much higher incomes than in other countries. The lack of physician supply is not a natural occurrence, but rather the result of human intervention by the AMA. 20 years ago, the AMA lobbied the government to cut medical school enrollment, limit residency federal aid, and eliminate a quarter of all residency positions in order to protect its own interests, giving the reason that it was concerned about a future surplus of physicians. But the real purpose was to drive up physician pay by creating scarcity. This greed-driven regulatory capture has had far-reaching negative consequences for the US healthcare system. The most immediate consequence of which is that the number of medical school graduates was exactly the same in 1980 and 2005. While the US population grew by 30% over the same period, the severe imbalance between supply and demand has further exacerbated the strain on healthcare resources. In addition to the physician community, the profit-seeking behavior of hospital groups and investors has become increasingly evident. Similar to the healthcare industry, consolidation and mergers and acquisitions of hospitals and clinics have become the norm. In the past 20 years, 1,000 mergers and acquisitions have occurred among 5,000 hospitals across the United States. This trend of consolidation is not limited to hospitals, but extends to all types of clinics. The core reason why many physicians choose to join large medical groups is the heavy administrative burden that independent practice faces. Managing the US healthcare system is not only time-consuming and labor-intensive, but also involves high operating costs. Joining a group avoids these hassles and allows physicians to focus on their practice. Currently, 3/4 of all U.S. physicians are employed by corporate groups or hospitals, most of which are dominated by private equity firms. Private equity firms enter the healthcare space with the claim of lowering the cost of care, but in reality it is entirely possible for private equity firms to profit from higher prices because of the relative passivity of patients in their healthcare choices. 2025, a recent study showed that when private equity firms control more than 30% of the market, the price of care increases significantly. Healthcare prices rise significantly. Gastroenterology clinics increased prices by 18%, while OB/GYN and dermatology clinics increased prices by 16% and 13%, respectively. This trend of price increases has become the norm. The case of American Anesthesia Partners is a prime example. The company created a monopoly by acquiring most of the anesthesiologists in the Denver area and directly increased reimbursement rates by 30% to 40%, nearly 30% higher than its competitors. With a monopoly on local anesthesia care, insurers and patients had no choice but to be forced to accept the higher prices. At the same time, the company has continued to compress its operating costs, thus making its profit margins ever larger. What is even more distressing is that private equity-held healthcare organizations are not only jacking up prices, but the quality of care is significantly declining. An updated 2024 study by the University of Chicago found a 10% increase in short-term mortality rates at private equity-held nursing homes. Another Harvard study also noted that hospitals acquired by private equity firms experience a significant decline in quality of care, with a 25% increase in complication rates and a 38% rise in bloodstream infections. This finding has been further corroborated in follow-up studies in recent years. The core reason why this happens is the profit-seeking nature of private equity firms. In order to maximize profits, they continually increase the revenue contribution of physicians and patients, boosting profit margins through operational leverage while neglecting quality of care. In addition, most private equity deals rely on huge amounts of debt financing. In order to service the debt, investors must generate more free cash flow. This leads them to cut corners in their operations and cut necessary healthcare investments, thus further sacrificing quality of care. It is worth noting that greed is not only a problem for private hospitals and private equity firms. Some so-called not-for-profit hospitals have also shown a strong tendency to seek profit. For example, the former CEO of UPMC, a non-profit hospital, earned nearly $12.5 million annually in 2023. While specific figures for 2024 have not been made public, they are expected to be down from $13 million in 2022. As the head of a non-profit organization, it's shocking that he would receive such a high salary. When asked about the reasonableness of his salary, he responded only vaguely, saying, "The pay scale is determined by the board of directors." Such a response is not only unconvincing, but also further exposes the problem of chaotic internal management and the existence of transfer of benefits in non-profit-making hospitals, as well as seriously undermining the public's trust in healthcare service providers. Having said that about insurance and healthcare providers, let's look at the most shady pharmaceutical industry. Their profiteering behavior and lack of ethics are also important contributors to the collapse of the U.S. healthcare system. The U.S. is the largest drug market in the world, accounting for 44% of the global drug market, with a market size of over $600 billion. On a per capita basis, Americans are the world's top drug spenders, nearly 50% higher than second-ranked Germany. Yet they are not purchasing better quality medicines, but rather the exact same medicines as the rest of the world at a premium that far exceeds the global average. A Bloomberg 2024 analysis shows that even after accounting for various discounts, all but one of the 8 best-selling drugs in the United States are priced much higher than in other major countries, and the spread is very wide. In the case of Gleevec, a drug that treats chronic myeloid leukemia, the average annual cost of the drug in the U.S. is on average $7,800 higher than in the rest of the world. Although this price difference narrows slightly in 2024, it is still a heavy burden for patients who need to take the drug for a long period of time. To add to the absurdity, Differences in drug prices do not only exist between countries, but can vary dramatically even within different counties of the same state. In the case of Zytogar, a common scientific name for the treatment of prostate cancer, the pricing of the drug varies dramatically from one area of the state's health care program to another. In northern Michigan, patients pay as little as $815. In the Lake Michigan Shaw region, the price is nearly $3,400. That's more than a threefold price difference for the same drug. This price confusion not only violates the principle of fairness in the marketplace, but also places an unnecessary financial burden on the general public. Pharmaceutical companies often justify high drug prices by citing high research and development costs, claiming that research and development expenditures typically account for 20% to 40% of a pharmaceutical company's total revenue, and that the vast majority of drug research and development projects ultimately fail, resulting in a time-consuming, high-risk process for the development and commercialization of new drugs. However, pharmaceutical companies are still able to achieve substantial profit margins and return on investment. This is because, in addition to R&D, these companies are extremely efficient in their use of capital. The so-called R&D costs are more of an excuse to maintain high prices and reap huge profits. It is worth noting that drug pricing policy in the U.S. has undergone a major overhaul, with the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 giving the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services (CMS) the authority to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies over the price of high-priced medicines, and the CMS completing negotiations on the price of the first 10 medicines in 2024. These 10 drugs alone are expected to save Medicare $6 billion when the bill takes effect in 2026. The previous statement that the U.S. government is prohibited from negotiating drug prices with pharmaceutical companies is now obsolete. After the policy change, the government has gradually gained the right to negotiate drug prices, but the effectiveness of the program remains to be seen. The implementation of the Medicaid drug rebate program to a certain extent, but also weakened the ability to negotiate. The program essentially sets a maximum price for drugs within the Medicaid program, but this does not really reduce the burden on patients. Instead, it allows pharmaceutical companies to make up for their losses through other health insurance payers, indirectly transferring costs to the average patient, which is tantamount to continuing to maintain high prices in a different way. In addition to the pricing issue, the pharmaceutical industry has serious ethical issues. In 2014, payment databases were opened up, the central role of which is to disclose the financial relationships between healthcare providers and pharmaceutical companies. With the opening of the database, the chaos of pharmaceutical companies funneling benefits to physicians surfaced completely. Pharmaceutical companies pay physicians for the express purpose of getting them to prescribe more of their own drugs, rather than competitors' products. To accomplish this, they funnel benefits in a variety of ways, including illegal kickbacks, speaking fees, consulting fees, and research grants, which, while not necessarily illegal, are overwhelmingly in an ethical gray area that seriously compromises the objectivity and fairness of physician care. In 2023, pharmaceutical company payments to healthcare providers totaled $122 billion. Although the company data for 2024 has not yet been tallied, the available data suggests that this trend of benefit transfers has not been effectively curbed, which is a strong indication of the magnitude of the problem. Throughout history, many well-known pharmaceutical companies have been involved in similar scandals. For example, Novartis in 2010 and Pfizer in 2014 were penalized for illegal benefit transfers. And the opioid crisis triggered by Purdue Pharma was even considered a crime against humanity. The company induced doctors to prescribe opioids through false propaganda and transfer of benefits in order to promote them, leading to drug addiction and even death of a large number of people, which brought a deep disaster to the American society and made the public's trust in the pharmaceutical industry drop to the freezing point. Having said that, we should be able to clearly see the essential contradiction of the U.S. healthcare system, the serious opposition between capital, interests, and patients' well-being. The entire system has been reduced to a tool for capital to seek profit, rather than a public service platform to safeguard people's health. The system is polarized in the extreme, For those who are wealthy and financially stable, the US healthcare system is truly the best in the world. It has cutting-edge medical technology, state-of-the-art medical facilities, and a world-class team of physicians. As long as you have enough money, you can enjoy the highest quality and most efficient medical services and even get personalized treatment plans. However, for the vast majority of the general public, the healthcare system has become a heavy burden. They are faced with the double dilemma of expensive and difficult access to medical care, and even have difficulty in obtaining basic medical protection. The root cause of this polarization is that the US healthcare system has been kidnapped by the depth of capital, insurance, medical service providers, and the pharmaceutical industry. The three pillars of the intertwined, synergistic profit-seeking will be concerned about the life and death of medical services into a profiteering industry. The essence of medical care is to guard life and deliver human care. It is different from selling gourmet food or changing car tires. It is not a simple business transaction, but is directly related to the life, health, and quality of life of every person. Therefore, medical services should never be overly eroded by capital. However, in the current US healthcare system, the profit-seeking nature of capital completely overrides the value of life. Insurance companies, in order to increase their profits, deliberately raise the rejection rate and set up cumbersome administrative barriers. Healthcare service providers, in order to pursue revenue, artificially limit the number of doctors, raise medical prices, and sacrifice the quality of their services. Pharmaceutical companies, in order to reap exorbitant profits, maintain high prices of medicines and engage in illegal transfers of benefits. These behaviors have led to the monstrous development of the US healthcare system. Costs continue to climb, while medical outcomes continue to decline, and the process of improvement is unusually slow. Even more distressing is the fact that the system is particularly harmful to vulnerable populations. The cumbersome process of prior authorization denies sick children the care they need. It constantly inflates emergency room fees, leaving recovering patients with huge debts that they will never be able to repay. It costs nearly 40% of the population their lives by delaying treatment because they cannot afford to pay for it. And 64% of bankruptcies are related to medical expenditures, destroying the happiness of countless families. Even those who oppose the government-driven healthcare model have to admit that other developed countries have more sophisticated healthcare models, both public and private, than the US healthcare system. These countries either reduce the healthcare burden of the public through universal healthcare insurance, standardize healthcare prices through government regulation, or guarantee the accessibility of healthcare for patients by improving the public healthcare network. In terms of cost control and medical outcome guarantee, these countries are doing better than the United States. As the country with the highest medical costs in the world, the United States is at the bottom of the list of developed countries in terms of medical outcomes. This huge contrast is enough to prove the failure of the US healthcare system. It should be emphasized that criticizing the US healthcare system does not negate the role of commercial forces in healthcare. In fact, reasonable market competition and capital participation can promote the innovation of medical technology and the optimization of medical services. But the problem is that the US healthcare system lacks effective regulation and guidance. The profit-seeking nature of capital has not been reasonably restrained, leading to a serious misalignment of incentives throughout the system. The success of insurance companies depends on profits rather than patient satisfaction. The profitability of healthcare providers depends on price rather than effectiveness, and the performance of pharmaceutical companies depends on sales rather than efficacy. This misalignment of incentives has plunged the entire healthcare system into a vicious cycle of profits first, lives second, and it is getting deeper and deeper. We must think deeply. Is greed always the driving force behind social progress? When the greed of capital encroaches on the most fundamental area of life and health, we must restrain it through systemic reform and not allow it to flourish. The plight of the US healthcare system is a wake-up call for the development of global healthcare. To build a healthcare system, we must adhere to the principle of life first, balance the interests of capital and the public interest, and return healthcare services to its essence of guarding life. I hope that today's sharing can give you a clearer understanding of the current situation of the US healthcare system. Healthcare is not a tool for capitalization, but a basic right that everyone should enjoy. We welcome you to leave your valuable opinions in the comments section and discuss the development and change of the global healthcare system together. Don't forget to like, share, and follow our channel. We will bring more in-depth analyses on business, economy, and politics in the future. We'll see you in the next installment.